Tonight, at some point, you will lie in the dark and stare at the ceiling. Your body will be tired. Your mind will not care. And somewhere in the back of your skull, a quiet frustration will build because you know you should be asleep and you are not, and that feels wrong. But what if it isn't wrong at all? What if the version of sleep you've been told is normal, 8 straight hours alone, in the dark, in silence, is one of the strangest sleep arrangements in the entire history of your species? What if your restless 3 a.m. brain isn't broken? What if it's doing exactly what it was built to do before civilization decided sleep had rules? The real answer is far stranger than you expect. Here is what your ancestors actually did when they couldn't sleep. First, understand what sleep looked like before beds existed. Anthropologist Jerome Siegel at UCLA spent years studying 3 of the last remaining hunter-gatherer societies on Earth: the Hadza of Tanzania, the San of Namibia, and the Tsimane of Bolivia. These are groups whose lives most closely resemble the conditions your ancestors evolved in. And what he found shattered almost every assumption modern sleep science had made. They don't sleep 8 hours. They average just 6.5 to 7. They don't go to bed when it gets dark. They stay awake, on average, 3 hours and 20 minutes after sunset. They don't wake up with the sunrise. They wake before it. And here is the part that matters most. Almost none of them sleep alone. In every group Siegel studied, sleep was communal. People slept in clusters. Bodies close. Fire nearby. And in every group, the sleep of different individuals overlapped but did not match. At any given hour of the night, at least 1 or 2 people were awake. That wasn't a malfunction. That was the system. Your ancestors lived in a world full of real threats. Predators moved at night. Rival groups moved at night. Fire needed to be kept alive. Infants needed to be watched. The worst possible thing your group could do was have every single person unconscious at the same time. So the human body evolved a solution. It's staggered sleep. Different people in a group naturally fall into different chronotypes. Some sleep early, some sleep late, some wake in the middle of the night. You probably know people like this. You might be one of them. Evolutionary biologist David Sampson at the University of Toronto studied this staggered sleep effect and found that in hunter-gatherer groups, there were as few as 18 minutes per night when every single individual was asleep simultaneously. 18 minutes. Out of 8 hours of darkness. Your sleeplessness at 3 a.m. wasn't anxiety. It wasn't dysfunction. For most of your species' history, it was a watch shift. Now think about what those awake people actually did. They didn't scroll through a phone. They didn't catastrophize about a meeting the next morning. They sat near the fire. They talked quietly with whoever else was awake. They tended the flames. They listened to the sounds outside the camp. They watched the stars shift across the sky and tracked the hours by their position. Sometimes they sang softly. Sometimes they told stories. Sometimes they just existed in the half-dark, suspended between sleep and waking, in a state the brain produces all on its own. Historian Roger Akirch at Virginia Tech spent 2 decades combing through pre-industrial diaries, court records, and medical documents from medieval Europe. What he found completely rewrote the history of human sleep. Before artificial lighting became widespread in the 18th and 19th centuries, people across Europe did not sleep in one block. They slept in 2. They called them first sleep and second sleep. You would fall asleep at dark. You would wake naturally after 4 or 5 hours, around midnight or 1 a.m. You would be awake for an hour or 2. Then you would fall back into what your ancestors called second sleep until dawn. That midnight window had a name. Akirch found it documented across hundreds of sources. People called it the watch, or the watching hour. And it was not treated as insomnia. It was treated as a natural part of the night. People used it for prayer, for sex, for checking on children, for lying quietly and letting the mind wander in that liminal state between sleep and full waking, a state the brain enters almost automatically when it rouses in the middle of the night. Psychologist Thomas Ware at the National Institute of Mental Health tested this in a landmark experiment. He took healthy volunteers and exposed them to only natural light, 14 hours of darkness, 10 of light, for a full month. Within 3 weeks, without being told anything about two-phase sleep, they all began sleeping in 2 blocks. They would wake around midnight, Lie quietly in a state of calm wakefulness for an hour or two, then drift back to sleep until dawn. Where measured their brain chemistry during that midnight hour and found something remarkable. Levels of prolactin, a hormone associated with deep calm, meditation-like states, and the quiet alertness of a nursing mother, were significantly elevated. The participants described the midnight waking not as stressful, but as profoundly peaceful. One participant called it a velvet darkness. Another said it was the most relaxed he had felt in years. Your brain, when it wakes at 3 a.m. in a dark and quiet room, may still be trying to give you that. The problem isn't the waking. The problem is what you've been told to think about the waking. The moment you check the clock, count the hours you have left, and begin to worry, you activate a stress response that floods your body with cortisol, spikes your alertness, and makes it genuinely harder to fall back asleep. The ancient human who woke at midnight didn't look at a clock. Clocks didn't exist. There was no number to panic about. Consider also the environment those ancient bodies evolved inside. Modern sleep research consistently shows that humans sleep best in conditions that almost no one in the industrialized world actually has. Cool temperatures, complete darkness, ambient sound, not silence, but the quiet, irregular sounds of nature. Wind in trees, insects, distant water, and crucially, the presence of other humans nearby. That last one is almost never discussed in mainstream sleep advice, but the evidence is hard to ignore. Infants sleep better when they can hear or sense the breathing of a caregiver. Adults in couples or family sleeping arrangements consistently report lower rates of middle-of-the-night waking than those sleeping alone. Anthropologist Carol Worthman at Emory University argues that solitary sleep, one person, one room, sealed door, total silence, is one of the most evolutionarily unusual sleep configurations in human history. For most of your species' existence, sleeping alone meant one thing: you had been separated from your group. And that was one of the most dangerous situations you could be in. Your nervous system does not know you chose to sleep alone. It only knows that the warm bodies are gone, the fire sounds are gone, the breathing and the rustling are gone, and some ancient, wordless part of it stays slightly on alert, waiting for the danger that historically would have explained their absence.
This is not a small thing.
The psychological experience of sleep is inseparable from the social context that shaped it over hundreds of thousands of years. Think about what all of this means for you. Your irregular sleep patterns, the night you wake at 2 a.m., the night you can't fall asleep until midnight, the night you're alert at 4 a.m. and exhausted at noon, these are not evidence of a broken system. They are the output of a system that was calibrated for a world very different from the one you live in. A world with fire, not fluorescent light. A world with other bodies nearby, not thin walls, and a silent apartment. A world where midnight waking was not a problem to be solved, but a quiet pocket of time suspended between the day you had and the day you were about to have. Your ancestors, awake at midnight, were not suffering. They were watching. The next time your eyes open at 3 a.m. and the familiar frustration begins to build, try something different. Don't check the clock. Don't reach for the phone. Lie still. Let your mind wander into that half-lit space between sleep and waking that your brain has been producing for 100,000 years. You are not behind on sleep. You are not broken. You are on watch. And somewhere, in whatever way meaning travels across deep time, tonight's 3 a.m. is the same 3 a.m. your great-great-grandmother knew. Fire low, camp quiet, sky full of stars she could name, awake in the dark, exactly as she was meant to be.